I still remember the color of the sky that night. A bruised purple, smudged with streetlight gold. And the way my daughter's laugh skimmed over it like a small, bright stone skipping across deep water. It was Halloween. And everything smelled like candy and smoke. Like sugar, hiding something darker. I told myself to breathe. To be normal for once. To hold Lily's hand a little tighter. And pretend the world wasn't closing in. Lily was 5. A tiny witch with a felt hat that kept slipping over her curls, and a painted moon on her cheek because she had said she wanted to be mystery. Not scary. She pronounced it like a secret she could keep in her pocket. I told her I loved that about her. How she could take a cold night and make it warm just by believing it. I told her we would stay on the main street with the bright porches and smiling faces, and the carved pumpkins that looked like sleepy friends instead of open mouths. I didn't say out loud that I'd been looking over my shoulder for months. Debt is a shadow that learns your steps. Men who collect it learn your fear. It doesn't matter if the trouble was never your idea. The trouble learns your name anyway. I had been hiding from calls. I didn't answer, and knocks I pretended were wind. I knew there were people who wanted me to pay for a life I'd already left. A life my ex-husband had walked into like a man who believed doors never locked behind him. So when laughter rose high, and the cold bit through my coat, and Lily tugged me forward with her sticky, gloved hand, I smiled. I told her she could pick 3 houses in a row, and then we'd take a break on the church steps and count our candy. She counted out loud as we went. 1, 2, 3. And every number sounded like a tiny bell. At the end of the block, the town thinned out into quiet. The Carson house sat past the last streetlight, hunched at the edge of an empty lot. Once it had been the kind of place people admired in daylight pillars. A wide porch. Windows, like eyes, that noticed everything. Then it turned old and sad, and someone papered the downstairs with plastic cobwebs, and called it haunted, for the sake of teenagers, who needed a place to prove they were fearless. I had no intention of walking Lily anywhere near it. But sugar is a compass that doesn't care what it points at. In the space of 3 seconds, I bent to pick up her dropped bucket, and the street felt strangely hollow, and I looked up into a world without her. I said her name quietly at first. I said it like a song I wanted to sound casual. Lily. Baby. Where did you go? Come back. Then I said it the way a door slams. Lily. Heads turned. Someone laughed. A fake scream floated from a porch nearby, and my spine flinched like it had been tapped. I told myself there were too many people for this to be real danger. I told myself she'd stepped behind a bush, or followed a flock of older kids, or was one house over. The hat slipping again, and her free hand waving to get my attention. But my body knew before I did. It knew the cold, under the cold. It knew how a night can wake up and decide it wants to be a story you tell in a whisper for the rest of your life. I saw the hat first. A black crescent bouncing, and then vanishing through the Carson house doorway, as if the night had swallowed it. I don't remember leaving the sidewalk. Only the tilt of the world, and the way my breath ran out in pieces. The porch boards had a damp sound. The door groaned because it liked the sound it made. I stepped into a dim hallway that smelled like wet wood and old pennies. A cheap fog machine hissed somewhere. Plastic bats shivered from strings. I called again, and the house gave my voice back thinner than I sent it. There is a difference between staged fear and the kind that lives in floors. You feel it in your calves. In the hush between noises, I heard laughter. Not Lily's. Lower and wrong. I almost told myself it was just a kid with a mask trying to earn a memory. Then the house breathed differently. And far above me, small and breaking, Lily cried, "Mummy." The word rose, like an alarm through my blood. I took the stairs too fast, caught myself with a hand that skinned on the rail. My flashlight app shook a narrow, pale circle across the landing. A shape stood where the steps ended. Tall. Still. As if it had been made for corners. The light found a jaw that could cut rope. Eyes that didn't blink hard or often. The dark line of a coat, made to hide things. He wasn't wearing a mask. And that told me more than an expression would have. Men who are sure of what they are don't need costumes. For a heartbeat I thought the word kidnap. And then the beam slid to the small person in his arms. And Lily's face was crumpled with tears but whole. Her witch hat gone. Her cheeks streaked. Her breath hiccuping through a sob that hadn't finished. I didn't think about permission. I took her. Greedy with relief. And her little arms clamped around my neck, so hard she made a squeezed noise. I said thank you once. And then again. And then quietly, because something in him made me want to keep certain sounds small. He didn't move toward me or away. His voice came out even. Like gravel that had learned how to talk. She came in alone. The door locked behind her. He tilted his head, as if he could read all the scared things beating under my skin. You shouldn't be here tonight. He said it like the weather. Like a fact. Not a threat. I hate my own laugh when it's nervous. It's thinner than I am. It's Halloween. Not Avarzone. You'd be surprised how often those two look the same. I saw the gun then. A clean edge under the coat. It wasn't the prop kind painted to be seen. It was the enforceable kind you carry, because you expect to need it. He took a step that was more turn than step. Toward the door. I thought he would vanish the way certain men do, into the place between light and any good explanation. But at the threshold, he looked back once, and let his voice drop, so it would land where only I could hear. Don't come back here. Not to this street. Not to this side of town. It wasn't advice. It wasn't even warning. It was something that had already decided itself, outside. Night pressed hard against my face. I carried Lily into the air, that should have felt safer than a hallway, and realized I was crying, because the cold stung in tracks across my cheeks. I wanted to take my daughter home. Lock the door. Pile furniture against a fear I could name. And tell myself the man in the house belonged to someone else's life. That should have been the end. In a kinder version of the world. But stories rarely stop where you want them to. They stop where they must. We sat on the church steps, because the church was the closest thing to a promise still open after dark. Lily's hands shook while she ate a single piece of chocolate, like a person who remembers what sweetness can do to a small heart. I told her she had scared me. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her the Carson house was off limits forever. She nodded, like agreeing was easier than understanding. She rested her head under my chin and hummed a bit of a song from school. And the sound threaded into the night like a fragile stitch, when she fell asleep later in the back seat. Her witch hat slumped over her lap. I sat in the driver's seat and let the silence fill the car, the way darkness steals a room when you turn out the last lamp. I kept seeing his eyes in the beam of my phone. The way they held steadiness, like some men hold a glass. I kept hearing the sentence about not coming back. How it slid into me, like something that knew where it belonged. I told myself he was a complicated warning. I told myself he was a page. Turned. I drove home the long way because I wanted to be sure we weren't being followed, and because the longer way makes a person believe she's clever. The house was a second-floor walk-up, with a door that needed a push at the end, because it stuck in winter. I tucked Lily in. Her hat on the dresser, like proof of a lesson learned. I sat on the edge of my bed and told myself I could put the night in a box and keep it on a high shelf. But the mind has a way of setting certain boxes on fire. I closed my eyes and smelled the Carson house again. Wet wood and metal. And something that wasn't really fear, but like the shape it made. I slept. If a person can call what I did, sleeping. I woke 3 times to check the locks. I woke once, because I imagined a footstep outside the door. By morning, the story had already started hardening into something I could tell myself. Wasn't the beginning of anything. It was a bad moment. Handled. It was a stranger who said things, and would now not exist. But beginnings never look like beginnings from the inside. They look like explanations you give yourself, so you don't have to admit that a single night can change the climate inside your chest. I should have known, when a man walks out of the dark holding your child like something breakable and speaks to you as if he's giving you a map out of a country you didn't realize you were living in, that he won't disappear just because you want him to. A missing child. A man without a mask. A warning that sounded too much like a promise. That was the night the house decided it could haunt me. That was the night a stranger kept my daughter safe. And then, somehow, refused to vanish from the story where we thought we were the only names that mattered. I didn't know his name then. I only knew the shape he left in the doorway, and the kind of quiet some men carry like a weapon. Later, I would learn how men like that are made, and what they do when the world believes it already knows them. Later, I would find out how far a person can go when he decides he won't lose a child again. No matter what has to burn to keep that promise. That night, I only knew enough to hold Lily until my arms hurt, and to listen to the house settle around us like a tired animal. I told myself we were safe, because sometimes the sentence is the only blanket you have. I didn't know safety would soon come wearing a different face. A colder house. A quieter morning. I didn't know safety could look like the same man who scared the city into whispering his last name. He had told me not to come back to that side of town. I should have listened. But there are orders that feel like fences, and orders that feel like roads. I took his for the second kind without admitting it. I took it because something in his eyes said he didn't enjoy telling me what to do. He had simply decided to be the kind of man who tells the truth before the truth arrives. He disappeared into the night. He didn't disappear from my story. Stories are honest that way. They keep the people we try to forget until it's time to remember all at once. 3 days is a long time when you're waiting for your heartbeat to stop auditioning for a role it never wanted. I kept Lily close. I walked her to daycare and back, taking different routes as if streets could forgive the past if you asked them politely enough. I checked the mail and found nothing. I checked the phone and found silence. I checked the mirror and found a woman trying to look like someone whose life made sense. On the 4th afternoon, a black sedan idled across from the daycare. It wasn't loud about it. It simply existed in a way that made the air around it pay attention. The driver's door opened, like the car had been thinking about it for a while, and finally decided. He stepped out in that same dark coat that didn't ask permission. The same unhurried walk that said he'd never found anything worth rushing toward or away from. He looked at me, and then at Lily, who hummed under her breath because 5-year-olds believe that melodies can make a street belong to them. You didn't listen, he said. I live here, I answered. And it sounded childish, because sometimes the truth does, when you're scared. And I don't take orders from strangers. He didn't smile. Not really. His expression moved half a degree, and I wasn't sure if it was amusement or disappointment. He reached inside his coat, and I froze, because instinct outruns logic. He pulled out a piece of paper, folded once, with a nail hole through the top. This was on my door this morning. I didn't want to unfold it. I knew it was a bad magic trick. And I'd been a mother long enough to hate surprise. I opened it anyway. I know where she lives. The sentence held its own weather. Cold blew straight off the page. I'm not the one they're after, he said. His voice had the calm of a man who has seen rooms after the noise is over. They used your daughter to say my name. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to tell him his life didn't leak like that. Not into other people's shoes. I wanted to call him a liar, because that's easier than calling a thing fate. Who are you? I asked. He didn't offer me the full truth, but he gave me enough shape to hold. Adrian, he said. Adrian Kane. The name landed like a stone in still water. I'd heard it. Not from anyone I loved, but from an overheard conversation. A late-night news voice. that had learned to lower itself. A cashier who spoke certain names, like they might notice if you said them too loud. I didn't know what the city believed about him. I only knew. It said it softly. "Don't take her home tonight." He said, "That's not your decision." I answered. And even while I said it, I understood how flimsy it sounded. Decisions aren't always made by the people who have to live with them. He gave me the kind of look that tests a person's pride, and then moves on. You can argue with me, you can hate me, but you can't be careless. Not today. He glanced at the rooftops, like the sky was full of names. They're watching. It would make sense to say I left because he frightened me into it. But that wouldn't be honest. I left because the note made the air quit pretending it was harmless. I left because I looked at Lily and couldn't pretend anything anymore. He opened the back door of the sedan and didn't gesture like a man inviting a favor. He stood like someone laying a bridge across a river and waiting to see if you believed in it. Lily climbed in first because children are brave in the exact places. Adults have learned caution. I sat beside her and pulled her close, and the door shut with a quiet thud that sounded like a line being drawn. We drove out of the city in a long exhale. Buildings gave way to trees, and then to land that didn't notice names. The property was set back from a road that forgot you. Once you turned off it, the house wasn't showy. It was expensive in the way that walls keep secrets when they're paid well. Inside, the floors were stone and the light was stingy. Armed men nodded with the respectful indifference of people who know their job doesn't require friendliness. Lily waved at one of them, and he almost smiled, then remembered his training, and didn't. "You'll stay here until I say otherwise." Adrian said, "You don't get to. Until it's safe?" He corrected. And the word landed between us like a table. "You saw the note." He gave me a room at the top of the stairs with a view of trees that had decided not to explain anything. He told me there were men in the hall. He told me to sleep. I didn't tell him that sleeping is a skill that rusts. I put Lily to bed, and she dropped into that heavy trust children have. As if the world had decided all at once to stop asking for anything. I sat by the window and watched the courtyard trade stories with the wind. Somewhere below, footsteps walked and paused, and walked again. I couldn't tell if they belonged to the guards or to him. Dawn came like a confession you didn't mean to make. I carried Lily downstairs. And there he was. A shape leaning against a counter. A mug in his hand. The collar of his shirt open, like he had talked a long time with the night, and not all of it had gone his way. "You didn't tell me your last name," I said. He didn't look up. "I did. You said Kane like a man who knows it will do the talking." He poured a second cup and slid it across the counter to me. "You look like you haven't slept in a week. You look like a man who doesn't need it," I said. And I wanted to pull the line back because it sounded like flirtation. And that wasn't what I was doing. I was building a fence out of humor and pretending it was a wall. He finally met my eyes. And there was something in them I hadn't seen the night of the house. Not softness. Softness is too fragile a word. Weariness that had learned how to stand. "I had a daughter," he said. 5 years ago. She died because someone needed to prove they could touch me. There are sentences that change your posture. I put the mug down because my hands knew they wouldn't hold it steady. "I'm sorry," I said. And I understood how poor the phrase was. How shabby and obedient. "I'm so sorry." He nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. Not for me. And not for the people who had done it. It was acknowledgement that certain words can live in the air without breaking anything. "I left that life," he said. "Or I tried to. Leaving is not a door you close. It's ground you walk away from while it throws stones." Lily padded in. Hair sleep-tangled. Pajama cuffs too short. Because children insist on growing, even when you beg them to stay small. She looked at him without fear. You found me in the spooky house, she said. I did. You're a good finder, she decided, and climbed into a chair, like the matter was settled. I watched him, watch her, and the expression on his face made me want to turn away. Not because it was ugly, but because it was as naked as grief will allow a man to be in front of strangers. His voice dropped a note when he answered. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes I am. Days made a routine out of necessity. His men came and went with quiet shoes. I cooked because cooking is math with mercy. And I needed something that turned effort into warmth. He ate across from me without small talk. But he noticed things, that I took my coffee with more cream when I was scared. That Lily liked to draw trees that held hands. That I prefer the window cracked, even when the air insists on being cold. It is dangerous when a stranger learns your harmless preferences. It is also how safety begins. Whether you want it or not, at night. The house listened. Every sound had a name. A radio somewhere far away. A wind that wanted to get in and couldn't. Boots on stone that don't apologize for existing. On the third night, I gave up pretending I wasn't waiting for something to happen, and found him outside on a patio that seemed designed to make the sky look closer. He was smoking like he was negotiating. Not with the cigarette, but with whatever needed him to keep breathing. You can't keep us here, I said. He didn't turn. You think I want to? You act like you own us. He glanced over, and it wasn't anger that moved his face. It was a kind of restraint you can mistake for cold, if you've never seen a man hold a door shut with his shoulders. I'm trying to make sure you don't end up buried under your daughter's candy, he said. Forgive me if my tone lacks charm. I hate it when my temper chooses a moment that requires discipline. What are you? Then I asked, if you're not our jailer, who are you? A man who ran out of good ways for the world to take what matters, he said softly. A man who is done being gentle when danger chooses children. We were very close, without meaning to be. The air between us felt charged the way the sky does before rain. A pressure that asks if you're ready, and doesn't care when you say you're not. I looked at his mouth, and hated that I did. I looked away, to remind myself what I'd promised my own survival. The house answered the moment for us. Glass shattered somewhere in the front like a perfect, ugly bell. Then the noises that come after boots. A muffled shout. The sudden discipline of men who have rehearsed for this. Adrian's gun appeared as if it had been waiting in his hand. Upstairs, he said. And I went because now was not the time to be difficult about pride. In the closet with Lily pressed against my chest, I counted her breaths, until counting became prayer. The hallway stuttered with footfalls and then stilled. There is a silence that feels like a question. And then the door turned, and he stood there, with a cut on his cheek, and the steady breath of someone who has done the math and found the solution that leaves him standing. It's handled, he said. Which is not the same as it's fine. But I took it. Because mothers make currency out of whatever pays. You're hurt. I reached for him before remembering I hadn't asked if I was allowed to. He allowed it. I cleaned the blood away with a towel and water that pretended to be warm. Up close. He smelled like smoke, and rain, and something I couldn't name, that made me think of the first night in a new city. You should have run from me the night we met, he murmured. I tried. I said, I'm not very good at pretending I don't trust the people who come back for me. His eyes darkened the way a room does, when a cloud goes over the sun. Careful, Nora. I'm tired of careful, I whispered. I didn't mean love. I meant the mercy a person gives herself, when the world has proven it won't. He left before dawn. He left a note that said stay inside, which is not a love letter, but reads like one when you want it to. The front door hung slightly open, and drops of blood marked the threshold like a signature. His cars were gone. His men were gone. The house, without him, felt too large for my voice. One day passed, and then another, and then a third, and each carried an echo of the same question. What kind of man promises safety, and then walks into whatever breaks him to keep it? I packed a bag on the 5th night. Because survival is a muscle that twitches when you stand still too long. I told myself I could get a bus, disappear under a new name, teach Lily that home is wherever we make breakfast quietly. Headlights curled up the drive. The sedan stopped with a soft, final sound. He stepped out looking like a man who had told a fire how to behave, and paid for it. Bruises flared under his jaw. A new line crossed his brow like a sentence, without a period. He didn't ask if I had been about to leave. Stay where I told you to, he said. Not loud, and not kind. Don't talk to me like a command. I snapped. Because Enga gave me my hide back. You disappeared. What was I supposed to be to you, obedient? His answer came out on an exhale that had nowhere else to go. Safe, he said. That's what you were supposed to be. He looked older, and then younger. Like grief and relief had taken turns. I finished it. No one will ever use her name again to reach me. What does finished mean? It means I burned the map, he said. Files. Ledgers. Debts they thought still tied to my hands. It means I set fire to what I used to be and let it find its own ash. He sat by the fire that night like a man afraid to close his eyes in case he woke up as himself again. I found him there when the house had decided to sleep. Did you kill them? I asked. Because gentleness doesn't erase curiosity. And truth requires a price. Does it matter to you? He said without looking up. It matters who you are when you look at me. He raised his head slowly. The way someone does, when he's not sure if mercy is available. I'm the man who carried your daughter out of a haunted house, he said. That's who I am. I sat on the floor at his feet, because chairs felt too formal for what the night had already done. He reached out and touched a stray piece of hair at my temple, with a restraint that made my throat ache. You should hate me, he whispered. Maybe I do. I answered. But I can't seem to forget that you showed up when no one else did. Alive, he murmured. As if the word could hold us both. For now. That's enough. Enough is a strange kind of love. The half-light you stand in when sunrise has promised to come, but not yet kept it. In the days that followed, the city forgot his name, the way a body forgets pain in order to keep going. He bought land where noise goes to die. He asked us to come. I told myself I was doing it for Lily. I told myself you can build a life out of honesty, even if it comes disguised as a dangerous man's silence. The farmhouse sat at the edge of town, where fields made their own decisions. No gates. No guards. Just a kitchen that forgave clumsy mornings, and a porch that taught the wind how to speak softer. Lily ran through the grass, and butterflies acted like they'd been waiting for her. The first night, the walls creaked like old bones, remembering a dance. And I laughed because even the house was trying to be brave. Adrian fixed what needed fixing, with the ease of a man who likes offering his hands to stubborn things. He didn't say much, but silence can be a language when you're learning the alphabet of safety. In the mornings, he brewed coffee and set mine where I liked it, without mentioning that he'd noticed. In the afternoons, he sanded wood, or hammered something into being, while Lily asked him 1,000 questions about nails and stars, and why birds never seemed to fall. In the evenings, he read bedtime stories in a voice that had been made for orders, but found it could be kind. I watched them both, and felt a thing I didn't recognize at first, because its edges were unfamiliar. Peace is slippery, if you haven't held it in a while. It keeps thinking it belongs to someone else, and will have to apologize for arriving at your door. I held it with 2 hands and it still tried to slide away. Adrian saw it happening. The way my shoulders kept trying to rise. The way I stood at windows, as if something might come out of the trees, and ask to be invited in. He touched the small of my back when he passed me. Not a claim. Not a question. Just a reminder that there was a shape beside mine now, that knew how to stand steady. He left one afternoon without telling me why. Dirt under his nails, and a determined quiet in his jaw. He returned after dark, with a small locket and the kind of hush that makes you sit before you know you're sitting. We went to the porch, and the night wrapped itself around us, like a promise not to interrupt. I went to see her, he said. Who? My daughter. The words laid themselves down carefully between us. He opened the locket and showed me a world that would never grow any older. A little girl with dark curls tucked under a ribbon. A woman with a smile that could hold a day together. Adrian, looking like a man who didn't know what words would someday be nailed to his door. He closed it and ran his thumb along the edge, as if memory has corners that need smoothing. I used to go every month, he said. Then I stopped. I lied to myself about why. Busy is an easy word. Coward is the right one. What did you say to her? I asked. That I finally found something worth protecting again. He inhaled like the air had waited all day to be allowed in. That I'm done letting the past speak louder than my hands. We didn't kiss then. It would have been the obvious thing. And obvious is not always true. We sat with the locket and the night, and the ridiculous relief of being allowed to imagine tomorrow. Later, in the kitchen light, I reached for his knuckles and slid my fingers into the spaces between them, the way water finds stone. He turned his hand and folded mine inside it. And neither of us said anything, because sometimes speech feels greedy when quiet has paid for everything. Weeks made themselves into a life by repetition. I planted herbs, because small green things do not care about your history. He taught Lily how to ride a bike with a patience that made me want to look away and keep watching at the same time. She shouted his name like a bird, discovering it could throw its voice at the sky. He answered with that half-smile that had learned not to be seen often. I caught him looking at her when she didn't know it. That same expression from the safe-house kitchen, a reverence so bare, it almost hurt to witness. I caught him looking at me like he didn't trust the heaven he could put his hands on. The first rain came skimming over the fields with a kindness the city never learned. We left the windows open an inch, and the house breathed. At night, the porch boards ticked, and the trees confessed everything they'd heard. I woke once to find him sitting up. Not tense. Just awake as if rest, and he was still negotiating. What do you hear? I whispered. Nothing, he said, and smiled because nothing is a miracle some weeks. Just checking that nothing is still what it sounds like. Lily came into our room, before dawn, and climbed into the middle of the bed, the way children stake their claims without paperwork. Without apology, Adrian shifted to make space and placed a hand above the blanket, where her small back rose and fell. He closed his eyes then, as if the gesture permitted sleep to find him at last. I lay there and listened to 2 heartbeats and a rain that didn't threaten anyone. It felt like stepping off a boat that had been rocking for years. A month later, in town, a man I didn't recognize watched us too long at the market. He didn't approach. He just stared, with the flat interest of someone cataloguing things he might someday want. Adrian moved closer, and the man looked away, because there are people who can communicate a boundary without moving their mouths. On the way home, I said, "Do you think it's over?" and hated how small I sounded. Like hope was a glass too thin for certain questions. I think the fire went out, he said. And I think some men like to stand near cold ash and imagine they feel heat. You burned it all, I said. Half statement. Half need. I did. He reached for my hand on the seat between us. The gesture, casual and permanent. But I can't promise the world won't test us. I can promise it will find me between it and you. There is a peculiar relief in knowing someone intends to stand in front of a door you fear will open. It is not equality. Not the righteousness of two perfect halves. It is partnership. Messy and holy. It is the courage to sleep because someone else is awake. That night, I slept hard and dreamed of nothing, which is the softest luxury I have ever owned. I had avoided the Carson House road since that first night. Avoidance is a brittle kind of power, and brittle things break when you need them most. On a clear afternoon that felt new even to the sky, I drove the long way home and found myself turning without thinking, as if the car's bones remembered a path my mind wanted to forget. The house still stood, exhausted and shameless. Someone had boarded the windows. The porch sagged. A plastic bat clung to a nail the way fear clings to a person who has outgrown it. I parked and turned off the engine and sat with the old ghost, until it looked less like a monster and more like a shed skin. When I pulled into our drive, Adrian was fixing a hinge on the back gate. He straightened when he saw my face. "Where did you go?" he asked. "To the Carson house," I said, and the sentence didn't tremble. "It doesn't scare me anymore." He waited a beat, measuring the air between us, then nodded once, like a man who appreciates when someone else finishes a job he had been quietly planning to do. "Why not?" he asked. "Because I walked out of it," I said. "And so did you." He set the screwdriver down and came close, his hand lifted to the back of my neck, not to hold me still but to give my spine a place to rest. I leaned in and let my forehead touch his chest. The world isn't a safe place just because you love someone inside it. But love can make a place in the world safe enough to sit down. We stood there, while the breeze moved through the trees, like a choir clearing its throat. I didn't need a wedding or a promise written down. I needed what we had mornings with coffee. He made the way I take it. Afternoons, where Lily's laughter made the porch boards vibrate. Evenings where he read, and the house listened. Survival had pretended to be love for a long time in my life. Now love pretended to be survival so that it could ease into me without tripping alarms. It worked. On a Sunday, he asked if we could drive somewhere, without telling me where. We took the back roads. Trees became older. The sky widened. The gate of a quiet cemetery clicked behind us. He walked ahead with a bouquet, so simple, it felt like honesty wildflowers bound with twine. I stayed a few steps behind, because grief is a conversation some people must have in a language only they speak. He knelt. He spoke softly, and the wind leaned in to listen. When he was done, he stood and turned to me, with eyes that had put something down and picked something else up. "I told her," he said, "about the porch, and the bike, and the way Lily says my name, like it's a riddle. She solved herself. I told her I didn't think I got to have this again. But I do." On the drive home, we didn't talk much. You don't after church. Even when church was a plot of grass and a stone with a name on it. At the farmhouse, Lily barreled out to meet us with a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a crooked roof. "Us," she announced. And the word was big enough to hold a house. At best, a future. And the way his hand found mine without looking. As the sun settled behind the fields, the wind moved through the trees with a sound I had never noticed before, something between applause and prayer. I stood beside him and watched the light change the edges of everything it touched. For the first time in years, Silence felt safe, not haunted. Home. If you had asked me the night of the Carson house what I wanted, I would have said to be done with fear. Fear doesn't leave when you ask. It leaves when you show it a door and stand beside someone who understands how to hold it open. I didn't need a perfect love. I needed the kind that stayed. The kind that says, "Don't go back there," and then spends every nerve keeping the promise. We built a life out of small proofs. A cup placed where I would reach for it. A bike seat, steadied by a hand that knew precisely how much to hold and how much to let go. A locket closed carefully and set in a drawer beside the receipts for a future we had begun to afford. And when nights got loud or days tried to rehearse old scenes, he would meet my eyes, and something in him would go quiet and certain, and I would remember the hallway, the gun I hadn't asked for, the sentence that had sounded like a warning and turned out to be a vow. The haunted house is still there. I'm glad. Some ghosts don't leave because they're angry. They stay to remind you that you survived. And sometimes love isn't a rescue. Sometimes it's a person who refuses to let you walk alone into dark rooms ever again. If this story made you breathe a little easier, tap like so. More people can find it. Share it with someone who needs a quiet kind of hope tonight. Tell me in the comments, what does home mean to you now? And if you want more stories where love protects and heals, subscribe and turn on the bell. I'll be here when the world goes quiet.